Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to show you make a mini lantern with mica stone stained glass style. Now I love using mica. Mica is a stone that you can purchase or find that is very thin layers of somewhat clear stone, and they're all stuck together. That's the way the stone is created by nature. You can buy them, as I said, or you can find them someplace. They're found in different parts of the world. These I bought on Amazon. Now, the stone itself has lots of very thin layers. Now, I peel them apart. I'm using a like X-Acto knife blade, matte knife blade. Be very careful when you're doing these. You don't want to hurt yourself. You can always also use like one-sided blades that people use to, I don't know, carve different things or scrape different things. There's lots of different blades you can get that would work. The reason why I like using a blade is the sharp edge helps you start the cut, because you're not going to want to use the whole thickness probably of when you buy mica stone, because it's really thick, and it would be very heavy and more expensive, and light wouldn't go through it as much. I like to make it quite thin. You can also cut it with scissors when you're done, if it's thin enough. So it's very handy, to use for something like this after you have peeled it apart. Now, obviously, it also gets weaker the thinner you separate the layers. So you might not want to get it too thin. But there you can see I've separated it into one piece. And now I'm going to keep going until I have pieces that I like the thickness of. Obviously, the more you separate it, the smaller the piece you might end up with, because it may not separate into a very even piece. That's a nice size, and it's a nice thickness also. So I have this plastic container that I have separated a bunch of pieces that I'm going to use for this project. And they also have little tints of different color in them, which I find fun to use. This is a very small piece of mica that I'm using. I use them down to like about 8 or 10 millimeter in diameter. So I have used very small pieces in different projects. This is kind of a natural hunk that's been taken off of a bigger piece, so I didn't cut this one. It's very irregularly shaped, and I like the irregular shapeness of it to use at times, because I might want to fill a gap, and I might not want that sharp edge that you would get if you like cut it with a pair of scissors. So you can go around and around a piece of mica or any kind of glass you have until you get a nice adherence and an even overlap between the top and the bottom. So that's why I'm going around this a couple different times. I'm using half the width of your normal 7/32 inch foil. I'm using black backed foil so that when I'm done, I won't have any copper color on the inside of my project. I'm going to be patinaing this, and I didn't want that copper color because I wasn't sure if I was going to use black patina or copper. I'm just pressing this down into a table surface. You can do that, or you can use a fid and squish it down, or use a stained glass rolling tool to make it smooth. You're going to want to stick the foil onto your project somehow, because you don't want to have gaps and have it not stuck down well, because if you do that, it's not going to stay attached. When you solder it, it's going to come up and you're going to have gaps, and your piece of foil will no longer be adhered to your mica, and then your mica might just fall out. Mica's not terribly strong once you have made it into really thin pieces. It's not, really strong like a piece of glass. So you might have more of a chance of it falling apart as you're working. I'm using a normal pair of household scissors to cut the mica because, as I said, it's a pretty thin piece of mica, so you can cut it easily. I'm just trying to make that even at the bottom so the angle's correct. Now you can draw on the mica. I have used Sharpie markers and stuff to draw and make sure that my cut is exactly what I want. So you can do that. I've even used pencil on mica. That seems to adhere fine for this. For these sharp, straight edges, it's pretty easy to just cut away, and then if it's not perfect, you can, just do another cut to make it the shape that you want. You can kind of eyeball it and then cut it again. So at this point, I'm making lots of pieces that will fit my little mini lantern. So I bought that mini lantern shape that's used for like those dry plants that people hang, or other designs that people might use those little shapes for. And I foiled that metal into for my project. Whenever you buy a metal frame like that little mini lantern frame that I'm using, it comes with an alloy metal, and often the metal has a finish on it because most people don't want to make stained glass lanterns with them. They don't want it to rust or anything. And whatever the alloy is or the finish they put on projects like that, usually solder will not stick to. So to make the solder stick well, I wrap the metal with copper foil. And you can either like go the long way or go around and around and around each piece of metal. But whatever you do, you want to cover the metal where you're going to solder, and then you're going to push down the foil with some kind of fid, so that it's smooth and attached nicely to your metal that you're using. Usually when I foil something, I will overlap the foil. You can either do that, or you can just end it where they meet. So either way works. As I said, I usually overlap so that there's no problem of it sticking. Because this was a sharp corner, I just kind of ended it from one piece to another. Now I'm pushing it down nicely on both sides all the way around. As you're pushing down the foil, you can also, kind of push in the corners and make sure everything is meeting nicely. So there we go. I'm pushing along the edge. That kind of sticks out, so I'm cutting that extra piece of foil right there. So basically what I did was I made a whole bunch of shapes that fit this little lantern thing that I'm going to use. And now I am going to figure out where to put them. So as usual, when I'm doing projects like this, I'm starting with the large pieces first. So I'm going to put in large pieces that I have created, and then I'm going to fill between the large pieces with smaller pieces. Now, because I was using this mica, I don't have any pieces of mica that were actually big enough to fill the larger triangles on this. Even though they're not that large, my mica was not big enough. So the quote large pieces are not really that large. So I'm going to have to piece together the sides. I'm going to leave one of these larger triangles on this lantern open and for my door. So because I want to put LED lights inside this lantern, I need to have some place to enter the LED lights. So that will be what I would call a door. So I kept out one piece of mica that I cut that's nice and sturdy, and one of my larger pieces to use for the actual door. Now see, that piece actually is a whole triangle of the for the base of this lantern, so that's kind of cool. I'm going to have one piece that's actually completely filled. Now, when I was doing this, and then of course I would wash it and then come back and work on it again, I did, when I was washing it, find that one of the triangles or the pieces that I had made was too weak, too thin, and it fell apart, and I had to take that piece out and put a new piece in. So that's one thing that you kind of have to expect when you're working with something like mica that's delicate. So, you know, it's like lots and lots of little layers of this stone putting together for a piece of, you know, after I peel it together for making one piece that I'm using for this lantern, I have to expect that I may have some issues with pieces falling apart because, yeah, it's very thin and very delicate. And I made it even thinner by peeling it apart with my mat knife. So I should expect a little bit of fallout. So yeah, this is a very small piece I'm using right now. And yeah, I'm just tacking the pieces together. I'm not actually doing the full solder all the way around each piece right now. I'm picking up scraps that I did. They're not really scraps, but pieces that I have already foiled, and I'm going here and there to try to figure out where I can put them, where they will fit to fill in my creation. And I actually had to come back and cut some to fit some spaces because even though I made a whole pile, as you can see, I did not have the correct shape as far as I was concerned to fill an area. So, you know, I don't mind them not filling perfectly. Immediately, I do fill some of the gaps with actual solder instead of the mica. So at times, if I have a gap that I don't feel is all that big a gap, I will just fill that with solder. But most of the time, I wanted to have a piece of mica that will work. I also, because this mica is so thin, I didn't mind if the mica overlapped the seam of the next piece of mica a little bit. So most of the time I like my pieces of stained glass or whatever I'm working with to not overlap. You know how stained glass, you don't generally overlap one piece of glass to another. You go from one space to another. But as I said, this mica is so thin that it really was not noticeable if one piece slightly overlapped the next one at times. So, so yeah, that last piece that I put in actually overlapped. I'm adding some solder to some of the gaps right now, and I'm putting solder on the spaces that, the foil on the edges. And yeah, like most of my work, this 3D work, you're not going to get these really smooth, typical stained glass seams that you might, if you're working with glass, flat glass, you're going to want nice, smooth seams. But with something like this, you're probably not going to get that because you're getting one piece next to another. And once you heat up one piece, the piece next to it's going to melt a little bit, la, 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 la. And you might not get that perfect bead that you might want with your normal stained glass work. If I heat it up too much in an area, my piece of mica is just going to fall right out. After it cools down, you can come back and try to make the bead more even. You don't want to do it all at once because it will release, the foil will release, and as I said before, you might lose your piece of mica. You can see that some of the mica is very clear in areas, and some of it's kind of yellowish, and some of it's brownish. I like the various colors that you get with mica. It's a lot less even than with stained glass. That's my little door that I made. And I am now adding pieces to the bottom where the door wasn't big enough to fill the whole triangle. So I'm just adding some pieces to the bottom of that triangle. The door will overlap this. I just need the door to be big enough for the LED wires to go through. So I'm figuring out, okay, I need another piece over there. And you can see that the door is not like a perfect triangle. It's irregular at the bottom because of the mica. That was the shape that came off when I made the mica layer. The tweezers I'm using have silicone points to them, which is really nice. They don't rust, and the solder won't stick to them, because normal tweezers that you can get, the solder might end up soldering to the tweezer itself, and that is not what you want. And also, the silicone tweezers, they're easy to clean. So I have a pair that are bent a little bit, and another pair that are straight, and they're very handy to use in different situations. So I soldered one end, and then it was kind of sticking up in the air. So I then held my tweezers and held the piece of mica from a different angle, and released that first piece of solder, first end that I soldered, and then I could solder it flat or more flat. So that looks nice. And then I had to figure out the other hint. I needed some kind of little hook on the other side that I can put a wire through to hold my little door shut when I'm done. This was kind of a pain to hold. I tried that little clip, and that kind of held it a little bit better than just trying to hold it with my tweezers. But yeah, as you can see, I wasn't overly successful. So then I tried to do it from a different angle. What I needed to do was just get one end that held nicely, and then I could work on trying to make the other end hold down. But it was a little bit hard to get it to stay at the angle I wanted it to be. There we go. So that will work nice. I will put a little loop on the door that matches that one, and then I'll be able to put a wire between the two. So I then used a pair of pliers and kind of made that flat-ish so that I could solder it down and kind of blend it into the rest of the project. Again, I didn't want to heat up that wire too much because it would just fall right off. So I had to kind of go slowly with it. And I wanted both sides because that would kind of help blend it into the rest of the project. I didn't want it to like scream, I'm a wire. I wanted it to kind of blend. And I did at one point with this project, I washed the whole lantern and then went back to my work surface. I had to cut some new pieces of mica to fit some spaces that I just didn't have one already cut that worked nicely. Ooh, that looks nice. That will work. So now I just have to put the loop on the other side. That will stay on the door itself, and that will line up nicely. Again, sometimes it's just, just kind of going back and forth, trying to get it to work, trying to get it to stay on, be soldered without falling apart, be at the right angle, etc. I'm only soldering this to the foil that I wrapped around the mica, so it's not terribly sturdy. If I needed it sturdier, I could have wrapped that wire all the way around the door. Then it would have been really sturdy. So I could have made a wire door first or afterwards, and that would have made it a very secure door. This piece of mica that I'm using for the door is a little bit thicker than some of the other mica that I had. So I felt that it was going to be strong enough. I mean, this is a very little mini lantern, and once it hangs up in my house, it's not going to need, a lot of strength because people aren't really going to do anything with it. So once I get the lights in it and I shut it up, it's just going to be there. It's not something that you're going to open the door again and again. So I don't have to have it very strong. I just have to have it working. I had to add another teeny piece of mica to that area because it was leaving a little gap. There we go. Now there's not that many gaps for the lights to shine through. And that's what it looks like when it's done. It's been patinaed in a copper patina that went with the color of the mica. And then I used some linseed oil and put that on top of the finished patina so that it has a finish to it. And there it is lit. I used the multicolor LED lights to light it, so it kind of flickers here and there as it's sitting there. And thank you very much. I was very happy with this project. Have fun. Thanks for watching.